I'm Chris Reed, Deputy Editor of the Union-Tribune Editorial and Opinion pages, one of them. And we are here with Crystal Trull, a candidate for San Diego School Board. On to you, Laura.
I am the other Deputy Editor. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Crystal. I'm Tania Navarro, Community Opinion Editor. Nice to meet you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we will start with a bunch of questions and then finish this with a chance for you to give an overall explanation as to why you think you're the best candidate. We met with your opponent yesterday for what it's worth. A recent federal report covering 2017 to 2020 said the district did not properly handle one single harassment or misconduct complaint out of more than 240 that were filed the whole time. Doesn't that finding suggest gigantic problems that can't easily be fixed?
Yes, it does. And the short answer, I was really impacted very deeply with that report because I've been in the district for over a decade, and a lot of people would tell you that they weren't surprised that this was happening. Many families have struggled to, report instances, get help from the district, and the Title IX office would not even respond sometimes. So I was really disheartened and just very troubled by that report.
Based on how our letter writers feel, they believe there should just be like a mass house cleaning. They just don't understand how in 2024 America this can go on. Do you feel there should be like an attempt to find out whoever knew about this and to root them out? We asked your opponent and she gave a vague answer that we took as a no.
Mm-hmm. So, transparency and accountability is one of the things that are core values to me. And when I ran in 2020, they were also very important at that time because the district has really struggled with these ideas of transparency and accountability. So, as a board trustee in that role, it is our job to make sure that everybody in the district is held accountable. And when we find that they're not doing what's expected or they're doing things that are illegal, improper, we need to address those. So I absolutely would want to make sure that we find out where that breakdown was, because inevitably, if we don't find out and understand why, it's going to continue to happen. And then we're going to, 5, 6, 7 years from now, find another report. And then, it'll just be continuing the cycle. So there does need to be accountability. There does need to be investigation, even in the district. Where are these systems breaking down? Why are they breaking down? Is it a mindset? Is it a process? Is it a communication issue? We need to find out what has happened for this to occur.
I used to know John DeBeck, who was a 20-year council member there, a board member there, and he talked about the fact it was incredibly frustrating that he had to always rely on district staff for key information. He didn't feel like he was presented 8 reports that said, here's different things we're worried about. He felt like he was presented 1 report. So imagine that you are elected and you join a board that remains dominated by the same folks who were in charge from 2017 to 2020. How would you be able to trust any staff member you dealt with who is a holdover to give you a straightforward information? How would you be able to function in an environment in which you are a member of the board minority, and you also are expected to have to trust a staff that has this history that's tough to look away from?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So I often get asked, you're going to be one of 5. What difference are you really going to make? And so my answer to that is one of the things that I do as a researcher. So, I do a lot of research in nonprofits, around nonprofits. And what we do with data is we triangulate it. We find data from multiple sources to determine if it's accurate or not. And so for me, if I'm getting reports from the same district staff, I am also a parent seeing it from the parent's perspective, how that information is communicated. And I'm talking to other parents, and I have other networks in the community at different school sites, principals, teachers, counselors, to really get the full scope, because I tend to be a little, a trust but verify kind of approach. You can tell me something, but I'm really going to just find out for myself if it's true. And then that will help me, kind of move forward. And, working with being one of 5 that has a very different approach to these things, what I really want to do with the other trustees is find something that we have common ground on and really work on that, because, we're going to have very different opinions about things. And I think at the end of the day, if we're all focused on the same thing, such as making sure that our students have the education, the foundational skills that they need, I think that's something that we can all agree on. And out of that, my hope is that we'll start to build some trust with each other and work on other things. So I'm an investigator. I like to ask a lot of questions. And typically I find when I ask questions, I get different answers. And so I need to find out what is the truth there. Because that's just how my personality is. I'll keep asking until I find out, if it's the truth or not.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask you, the allegations about Dr. Lamont Jackson were kept from the board until this spring, but after they became known, Jackson was forced out in a process that seemed to be very quick by government standards. Do you agree with the way that the board handled it and what could have or should have been done differently? And in your opinion, does the district seem to have a secretive culture?
Oh, goodness, that's a great question. Yes, they do have a secretive culture. And I think it's just been developed for many, many, many years. I think, there's this idea of groupthink. It's a leadership theory, an organizational theory. Groupthink is this idea that a group of people are so convinced that their way of doing things is the only way to meet an impending crisis of some sort, and they refuse to look at any other external perspectives. And so, my doctorate is in organizational leadership behavior, and for many years I thought, this board really has a groupthink mentality, and the district has a very much groupthink mentality. They keep it within their ranks. Some would say that develops unity. Okay, maybe. But the other side of that is it also creates an unwillingness to see different sides and perspectives that could be a better solution to some of these things. So to answer your question, yes, I do believe that the district has a culture of secrecy. Now, the way things were handled with Dr. Jackson. So, I'm as the chair of the DAC, I'm the chair of one of the largest district advisory committees in the district. And every month we would have leadership meetings with Superintendent Jackson and some of the other folks in the district. So I was having regular meetings with him, and I had known him in the Claremont cluster. He was our area superintendent. And so when these allegations came out, I was disappointed, very disappointed. And I worked with the two ladies that we ended up finding out who they were that made these allegations. And I remember when they left the district without a word, and I kept asking, where's Tonka? Where's Monica? And the whole area superintendent shuffle. And looking back, kind of makes sense to me. Maybe there was something happening at that time that we should have been paying attention to. So how it was handled, I understand the contract, how the contract is with the superintendent, the employment contract, and there are some things in there, that we had to follow, the severance, and the without cause. However, given that these allegations were substantiated, there is cause there. And I believe that we would have had a strong footing to stand on as a district to fire him with cause without severance. Because this is the kind of thing that we cannot tolerate. We talk about equity, inclusion, we talk about being kind and respectful. These are the kinds of graduates that we want, and yet we don't see this being modeled by our very highest leaders in the district. It's just very disappointing. And I think that if I was on the board, I would have probably been the minority vote saying, we cannot let him go with severance, because that just, it just creates, I believe in inequity and the acknowledgement. There has been no acknowledgement for these people, these 253 people whose cases were left not even investigated, as well as the two ladies who gave 17 years and 27 years respectively to this district. So there's been no mention of them. And that also is very disheartening.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you what you thought was good and bad about the district's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic response.
Mm-hmm. So this reminds me of a lot of when 2020 went around, a lot of the questions around COVID, should we open schools? Should we not open schools? Distance, online learning and all this. So there was a lot going on. And looking back, the district, I know that they tried to do the best they could. I think that they were relying on a certain amount of information that maybe wasn't the wider perspective of what could be done. I think they should have opened earlier. We waited a whole year My own kids, I have 3 kids in the district. We waited a whole year for those schools to open. So so that is something they didn't do well. What they did well is they went into action. They got Chromebooks for all the kids. They started the nutrition, making sure that kids were eating. They got all the PPE equipment. They distributed that quickly. They made vaccination sites available. So a lot of that, I think they did well. But the problem at the time was the learning loss. Let's get ahead of the learning loss. And now we're seeing the learning loss and trying to get ahead of that. So I think they made a misstep in not opening earlier, or opening some sites that were willing to open, even with space and distancing and the willingness from the community to open those school sites earlier.
Thank you for that. And just a follow-up question on something you mentioned was that learning loss. Do you feel like students are now where they need to be, or do you feel like that time has not been made up yet?
The time has not been made up yet. We're still waiting, I think, on the latest state testing. Somebody told me it's supposed to come out today, but I looked, it wasn't there yet. It's there. We see the learning loss too is a problem because of the absenteeism. Kids just don't want to come to school for whatever reason. And I think because we waited so long to get them back to school, something maybe, changed in them where they just felt like, what is this for? The social and emotional ramifications of COVID have impacted the learning loss, because when kids don't feel comfortable or safe or whatever's going on, they lack that social interaction. They can't learn as well. The teachers, they had their impacts, which impacts their instruction now. So yeah, the learning loss, I don't believe we have recovered. I haven't looked at all of the district-wide data from each individual school, but those schools that have always been high performing, they have less of a learning loss than those schools that maybe haven't been high performers in the past.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you, how do you feel the district is doing on academics after an era in which its top officials like Cindy Morton depict as national leaders?
Mm-hmm. Academics. So, I'm an educator myself. I teach at UCSD and USD. I teach graduate students. So, being an educator is something that I feel very passionate about, which means having your students learn. That's academics. And so we as a district, we've been really struggling. Our test scores really haven't moved very much over the past several years. And part of that is because we as a district are not very cohesive in what we do as a district. Many different school sites will do different things. And some of that is a good thing because they're working with the communities and they're working with what their communities need. But there's not a lot of consistent support in terms of assessment, in terms of strategy. I was surprised to learn earlier this year that San Diego Unified doesn't really have a strategy for literacy. And what we're finding is that some teachers are using sight reading, some teachers are using phonics, some all these different kinds of strategies. And we're getting various results. And I've even heard, shockingly, that teachers are not really taught how to teach reading in their curriculum when they're learning. They're getting credentialed, or they have just one class, which, if you're a science teacher or if you're a math teacher, the reading part is still very important. So the academics are something that we really need to focus on, the foundational pieces. I think somewhere along the line, the district lost its way in really focusing on the academics, because our teachers, they are the experts in teaching. We want them to be able to teach and do what they do best. But, those inconsistent policies or inconsistent strategies, inconsistent resources. So to me, academics is one of the primary areas that I really want to focus on to make sure that we're meeting those needs.
And do you think the district is ready for a coming era in which enrollments dwindle? This is likely to force the closure of at least some schools. And this has been hugely divisive in school districts in Northern California already.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are in an enrollment decline. I serve on school site councils on schools that my kids attend. And, being the chair of the DAC, we look a lot at enrollment. And, just in a few, 4 or 5 years, we've gone down from 120,000 to a little under 95,000 students. Some would say that that's because the cost of living.
Isn't that more over the last 25 years than the last 4 or 5 years? I thought the school enrollment peaked around 2000.
Yeah, well, I remember back in like 2016, 17, it was right around 120, 100, maybe 18. That was the data that I remember seeing on the website, but maybe I don't know if it was updated. But I could have to go back and look at those numbers. Some people would say that the enrollment decline is because of cost of living. That is a factor for some families. But again, I think after COVID, a lot of the families, there just was, I think, a disenchantment maybe of what was happening in our schools. They were able to kind of peek behind the curtain and see what was happening with curriculum, with classrooms, and their kids, were not getting what they needed. So the enrollment is impacted by that. And I think that closing schools, I don't support closing schools. I think we need to figure out what works in that community. I think we need to look at creative ways of filling those financial gaps and maybe working with community organizations, sharing teachers between schools. I think we really need to exhaust all of the options before we move forward closing the school just because the enrollment's down. And we need to figure out why the enrollment is down for that particular school site.
Okay, I'd like to ask a follow-up question on a couple of points there. The first has to do with the idea that you can avoid closing schools. How can you avoid closing schools? How does that possibly work? This has already been studied to death by the state. And according to the state, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office, if you don't shutter a campus, you're not going to realize savings because of the tremendous costs associated with shuttering a campus. So, you've offered so far a pretty blunt description of the school's problems. So this doesn't feel blunt at all to suggest that a district can avoid closing schools.
Well, I don't know all the budget information. I've tried to access budget information for the district, so I don't have a good sense of the cost of running schools. I don't have a good sense of what the facilities are, what the upkeep, the maintenance, the repair for each of the school sites. So I can't really answer that in terms of a budgetary perspective because I don't have those numbers. But I think how I would approach it is to try everything we can before we close the school. And if we need to close the school, to make sure that families have ample notification, that they are not left behind, and that it's not after the fact, after we've decided that they find out that this school is being closed.
Following up on the question about academics and Cindy Martin, the question over how to evaluate school progress is a state issue. It's not just a city issue. And there's been many, many education reformers who say that when the state adopted the scoreboard, the dashboard method about 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, that it emphasized stuff that had nothing to do with academics. And since then, there's been this argument that essentially there have been efforts to make it harder to find out how a student is doing and parents are doing. I know that you are going to be a local official if elected. You're not going to be a state official, but it just seems like there's only so much local officials can do if the state is committed to a model that tries to make it difficult to quickly find out how a school is doing academically. What do you think?
So we need to work with the state. I am a firm believer that if you want information, you have to ask the right questions. So I am not convinced that the type of testing that we do is really asking the right questions in the right manner to get the information that we need. So, and also, state testing, or you can't accommodate students with special needs. They can't even take the assessment because there's no real accommodations for that. So I think we as a local district, we have control over the types of real-time assessments that we use, because the state assessments are look-backs. That tells us how a cohort did prior. Well, that cohort is now in a different grade, potentially even graduated out. They may have moved to a different school site. So we're working with look back, like rear view data, and that doesn't help us moving forward. So as a local school district, I would want to make sure that we're using real-time assessments that teachers and educators can use real-time to impact and intervene and provide those instructional supports that are needed in the real time. And so we, as the second largest school district in the state, we have a voice at the state level. So we need to be talking to those legislators in the California Department of Education and talking about how we can really assess the information in a way that gets the answers that we need.
Okay, one last question for me. Calls for book banning and disputes over social, cultural issues have roiled some local school districts, especially in East County. But San Diego Unified doesn't seem to have been a part of this. So why do you think that is the case? And is that entirely a good thing? Are any of the issues that are being raised in these other districts ones that maybe the San Diego Unified should think about?
So you mean in terms of they're not a part of this because they haven't, maybe you can explain a little bit about how you think they're not in part of this. I don't know if I think he's, Chris, are you frozen?
Oh, I think we're frozen.
I think he's frozen. Okay. Well, I'd like to get some more information on that, but you know, I get the question a lot, am I a book banner? I'm an educator, so I believe in access to all different perspectives, all different authors, all different genres, all different materials, because as an educator, you have to present that information in a way that helps your students think critically. So I am not a book banner because book banner infers censorship. I am not about censorship. I really want access to all different kinds of information. And I, as an educator, you know, I need to make sure that I'm teaching in a way that, you know, doesn't sway anybody's opinion in my classroom either way, because I'm a very influential figure in that classroom. So I want to be sure that the instruction is in a way that it's not, you know, where the personal ideologies come into play.
Are there any issues that we haven't asked you that you want to bring up to this interview?
Tanya, I think we might want to wait 1 minute to see if Chris jumps back on.
He already messaged me, don't worry.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, Crystal. Is there any other topics you want to mention that we haven't bring to this interview?
You know, I think the family engagement, family involvement piece is a big one. You know, a lot of families, and this is not a new issue with San Diego Unified. Over the years, many families have felt at arm's length with the district. So, you know, I think that's an area that we really need to work on as a district to not just communicate to families, that's a piece of it, but to really make them involved and shared leadership, shared decision-making, which is not really happening right now. And I know that our district, there are so many, you know, families that want to be involved in the work, but they are not allowed, or they don't have access. So I think as a district, in order to address some of these things like enrollment, academic issues, the culture, the climate, without that community and parent involvement, two-way involvement, we're really missing a whole piece of that work that can be a lot stronger and a lot deeper. So, you know, that's another one of the things that I really want to focus on is, you know, the engagement, the family involvement. One of the things I want to do when elected is just really be in the community, hold regular meetings with families, virtual, in person, you know, be a presence in the community, in the district, in the Claremont, Scripps Ranch, Mira Mesa clusters, Madison cluster, Kearney cluster, making sure that they know that me as a trustee, I am available. I can potentially help them solve problems, or at least come back to them and let them know this is what I did to help solve this problem, or this really is an issue that we need to talk about as a district. So I think that engagement, that co-leadership, that shared leadership idea is really something that we're missing out on as a district, and that's something that I want to bring.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to go back with your question?
No, I thought the answer was strong, and thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry about my computer glitches. That darn AT&T.
Yes.
So I don't have anything more. Anybody else have any other questions?
No, we will only ask her for.
I have one question that I think is important. This is the second time you're running, right? Why did you decide to run again?
Great question. So in 2020, after the primary, you know, March 13th happened and the whole world shut down. So I feel like I didn't really get a good chance. I didn't have a chance to do what I was intending to do, to be out in the community more, to meet with voters, to have meet and greets. So I thought, you know, because of that COVID kind of separation, I wanted to try again. Also, you know, in 2020, it was citywide election. Now in 2024 and 2022, it's district wide, which I think makes a difference because, you know, in the primary, I got 46% of the vote, which makes me believe that my communities that I'm involved with actually want to see somebody like me in that role. So I think that given those two things, and of course, you know, I mulled it over for a long time because I thought, well, you know, can I really make a difference? What do I have the stamina? to do an election being 4 years older too. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try, because I've always been one of those people that, I'm not just going to complain about things. I'm going to try and solve problems and bring solutions. And that's just always how I've been. So I thought, you know what? I got to at least try again and see how this goes. And so far I've been just really just excited about the response that I've been getting. And I'm just energized by that.
Thank you so much for being with us. We will probably post this, I guess, next week. Appreciate your time.
Okay, great.
We want to give you, sorry, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're missing her last statement. So we want to give you 90 seconds so you can tell us and tell voters why should they elect you.
Okay, well, I've been in San Diego since 1976. I grew up in District A. I went to Mira Mesa schools. I have 3 kids of my own that are in San Diego Unified, and I've been very involved over the past decade. And what I would bring to this role is not just the experience of a parent who has kids currently in the school, but I also bring a governance experience. My background is nonprofits, working with boards, helping them strategize and develop ways to deal with their how to meet the needs of their constituents. I'm also an educator. I teach at UCSD and USD. I teach graduate students, so I understand education and learning outcomes. And I also I really understand budgets, getting to the core of what we're spending our money on. And I hope as a trustee that I can really make a difference on making sure that every resource we spend, financial, human, physical, intellectual, has a demonstrated positive impact for student success. So, all of these qualities together, I feel like bring a great mixture. And I feel like, we can't keep doing the same things expecting different results. And we need somebody new. We need a new voice on the board, even just to bring up issues and talk about things that are not normally talked about. So I'm hoping for folks to consider change and to vote for me, Crystal Trull.
One final question. Is Max the best Filipino restaurant in Mira Mesa? I'm kidding.
That's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
It's my nominee. It's my nominee. Thanks once again. And I'm sorry I missed a couple of minutes there. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.